Fantastic to be out here. And I'm going to be talking to you today about waves, spotting waves, looking for them, riding the waves, knowing how long to ride the waves, and when to get off them. Now, quite often I have people coming to me and asking me, it's been such a long time since we saw you on television news, what you're doing these days, and I tell them, I'm looking for waves. I'm looking at waves. And they sometimes scratch their head and they wonder, what on earth am I talking about? Well, today, I'm going to tell you what I'm talking about. And not very far from us here in Bhubaneswar is, you have the surfing festival, which often happens, Puri Beach. There are a lot of people out there when they're surfing. And you look at them, and you see what they are doing. And you will get some of the most important life lessons in the world today. What is the surfer doing? That surfer takes the board, goes out, and is there on the board looking towards the horizon, looking at a wave that is going to come, positioning himself or herself to then get onto the wave, to ride the wave, and then at the right time figure out when to get off. That, I think, is a metaphor for perhaps the single most important life skill that you can actually have. And in times of change that you are seeing today, that skill, the ability to spot waves, get onto the waves, ride the waves, and get off the waves is the most important. Now, the fact that you need to find the right wave and ride it is not a new concept. William Shakespeare said it. I think William Shakespeare said in Julius Caesar, he said, there comes a tide in the affair of men, which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Omitted, the voyage of their lives is bound in shallows and in misery. Find the right wave, ride that wave, and you are eventually successful. But we have to remember that William Shakespeare was writing in the 17th century about a Julius Caesar, right? So that's back in the day. What he was really describing was a slow tide. The tide was a slow tide. It came very, very slowly. What we are now seeing in the world are not slow tides. We are seeing daily tsunamis, monthly waves, storms in everyday life. So we've got to rethink the way we approach all of this. And I'm just going to dwell on this for a couple of more minutes. Let's look at the pace of human change and the way it is actually accelerating. What Shakespeare said about Julius Caesar. Now, picture Julius Caesar, right? Let's say, find that taking that tide means that he could become a more important ruler. Brutus could replace, Caesar. All of those things could happen. But fundamentally, if Julius Caesar was put into a time machine and he woke up 100 years later, he wouldn't notice the difference. What's different? The Roman baths are still there, the empire is still there, gone up 50 kilometers here or there, the baths are there, the togas are there, the spears are still the same, the regiments are still the same, the city looks the same. Nothing fundamentally has changed. And that's what used to happen. Change would take 100 years, 200 years before you could really tell what was happening. But why talk about that? Why talk about the turn when we moved from BC to AD? You go further back in history. It took something like, 8 million years, people estimate, before our ancestors who used stone tools, okay, let's call it 2 million years, going from stone tools to fire was perhaps 2 million years of evolution. Then you said, okay, fire has now spread. Agriculture, from the first agriculture to the time when agriculture was in everyone's hands was maybe 8,000 years. And then the pace of change started to accelerate. It wasn't thousands of years, it became hundreds of years. But it was still hundreds of years, right? It took a long time to move from swords to gunpowder, to muskets and to cannons. It took hundreds of years for that to happen. And then change accelerates. Now you're saying there's electricity coming, and there's railways coming, and there are planes that are coming, but it's still taking 30 years or 40 years for discernible change to happen. And then the pace continues to accelerate. Now look what's happening. Look what's happening with the computer revolution. Look what happened in mobile phones. Look what's now above all happening with AI. and look at the pace of change. 2 million years of is evolution, right? Moving to fire. It's 2 million years of evolution. Then it can become 20, 30 years of disruptive change. Today, it takes 2 months for ChatGPT to reach 100 million users. 2 million years of evolution, 2 months of a disruptive tsunami. That is the difference. So riding that wave becomes all important and completely critical. The skills that you now need to learn also become very different. At the time of Julius Caesar, you were a carpenter. What is the skill that you needed to learn? You needed to be the single best carpenter that there ever was. You become a really good carpenter or a good cathedral maker in Shakespeare's time, like in Julius Caesar's time. If you were a good cathedral maker, or you were a great carpenter, or you were a good farmer, that was a skill that you learned as an apprentice. And if you were really good at it, you would ride that skill for the rest of your life. The wave that you were riding was acquiring one skill, becoming really good at it, and then continuing to be on that till your last day. And that is what life was. Today, I can tell you that any skill that you are acquiring right now, as we speak, is probably redundant in 2 years. So how do you deal with it? That fundamentally, I think, is the single most existential question all of us need to ask ourselves. And I'm going to share a few examples of my life as to how that transformation and that change has happened, and how I have honed the wave spotting, wave riding, and getting off of the wave skills. So let me go back a little bit to when I finished college and was looking for a career. This is 1990s, right? And that's when the first part about spotting the wave really became, I think, very important. At that time, spotting the wave was all important because you had to say, let me not do what is strong today. Don't shoot for what is good today or what has been good for the last 40 years. Try and see what is going to be good 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Look for the right wave. So that's the skill when you've paddled out there in the ocean and you're looking up at the horizon and you're saying, is a wave coming? And you find the right wave to ride. So in my case, great-grandfather had been ICS, grandfather was ICS, father was IAS, so logically I should have become IAS, right? Become a bureaucrat or become a banker, if not that, do the tried and trusted things. Luckily, family said don't do it, because that's what is big then. It's not necessarily going to be great in your life. So I said, fine, let me do something else, which is exciting and interesting, and let me become a journalist. Exciting life. I wanted something with drama. Now, if you're becoming a journalist in India in 1990, should you ever be a broadcast journalist? The answer is no, because broadcast journalism does not exist in India. In 1990, there was just Doordarshan. That was the only news that was allowed. Why on earth would you become a broadcast journalism? It's an act of insanity. But then I was looking at the waves, right? And I said that, but everywhere else in the world, TV news has been a thing, right? It's been a very, very major thing from the 1950s. How can you have a situation where that will never come to India? And then you say, okay, fine, because the government controls terrestrial television. But then I scratched my head and I said, yes, they control terrestrial television, but they're not controlling the satellites. And CNN has just launched in Canada. So if the satellite wave starts to come to India, then news will change. And there will be a time when that will be a really strong wave. So let me not even become a print journalist, like my mother was. I am going to do something radical. I'm going to become a broadcast journalist. So, having finished my studies abroad, I chuck up everything, I come back here to a field that did not exist and had no prospect of existing. The first job that I got was working in a company called News Track, where we used to make video cassettes, VHS cassettes, which you could rent from a library, put it into a VHS machine, and watch that so-called news story, which by definition is 30 days late, right? It's because it only came out once in a month. And that's the video news that existed. But then look what happened. That was when the wave was starting to peak. So then that enabled us, those of us who got into broadcast news really early, were able to ride the wave. Then private news came. Then, the satellites opened up. then 24-hour news channels came, and if you were riding the wave early enough, that was really good. And it was good for all the people who were able to get into that field, early enough and soon enough. But then, one of the secrets and the lessons of the modern era is, when you are riding on that one wave, you should be looking over your shoulder a little bit and seeing what's coming. Because change is faster. This is not Shakespeare. This is not Julius Caesar's time. Change will come, and change will catch up with you faster than you can think. And luckily, that is something that we started to do. And I looked behind my shoulder a little bit, and I said, hang on, what's that wave coming called the internet? What is that going to do to television news? The point is, when you're on the wave, you've got to decide how long you can stay on it. And you have to have the staying power. Which brings me to my third lesson and the third story that I want to share. At a certain point in my career, I said, wait a minute, it is television, the news business, the business model are not going to work forever. The ads aren't coming, there's TRP game, all of that. Let's shift focus entirely. And then I was seeing another wave coming. And that was the wave of artificial intelligence. I took one look at that wave in 2018, and it was so clear and so obvious to me that that is a storm that is going to start changing everything. Because that one storm, that one wave, is not going to be a solitary wave. It's not just going to be AI. If that wave came, with it would come other waves. There would be robotics, there would be biotech, there'd be clean energy, there'd be genomic, all those things would come with it. And I said, this is going to be a really, really stormy water. So I gave up television news completely, chucked up my job and said, I'm going to do a startup and I'm going to work on AI and figure out how AI is going to disrupt the news business. And that was at that time a good idea. But at some point, I came to another realization, and that's, I think, the third major thing I would leave with you. There comes a time when you're looking at the choppy waters, and you're looking at the stormy waters all around you, and you're suddenly saying, wait a minute, maybe this particular series of waves is best handled from the shore. Get off the board, swim to the shore, and ride out the storm. That is the right thing to do. And it is, in a sense, a decision that I took in 2020. I said, how AI is going to play itself out in the media business is not a 1 year or a 2 year or a 5 year. It could be a 10-year process. It is going to require deep pockets. It's going to require staying power. This is not something that a startup should do. So I did get the company which I had set up was acquired by a very, very good group. And they are now taking it on. They have the ability to take that to its fruition. And I swam to the shore. And what have I done since then? I have done something which then all of you may also want to consider. Sometimes when you're on the wave, you're spending all your focus staying afloat. You're trying to survive. You're looking down at your feet at the board underneath you. You're looking at all the waves that are chopping itself out. It can be scary business. Now, when you're at the shore, you have a pair of binoculars. And you can look at the entire picture. And you can look at the horizon. You can see all the waves that are coming. And you can decide which of them do you want to bet on and which of them do you want to ride and how are you intending to do this. And that is fundamentally something which I then did with the next and the final part of doing it from a slight vantage point. You're doing it from a safe spot. And you're doing it in a manner that can actually lead to diversification. So, in other words, riding waves, spotting waves, and knowing when to get off. Realizing when the slow tide of progress has become the choppy waters of daily storms is, I think, eventually going to be the final lesson to learn. Thank you.